I called my supervisor to tell him the project was failing. He said he was busy, reviewing my colleague's better solution. Days later, they came to ask why the client was threatening to sue. My assistant gave them an envelope and said, "Is this why you called?" When they opened it, their hands started to shake. Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tales, where loyalty dies, lies bleed out, and the truth hits like a slap to the face. These aren't just stories, they're confessions soaked in betrayal and regret. Ever spotted a red flag when it was already too late? Say it in the comments. Let's tear into today's tale. My name is Nadia, and I watched my supervisor dismiss 3 months of my life with a casual wave of his hand. "Your colleague's approach is more comprehensive," Spencer said, not even glancing up from his tablet. "We're going with Celeste's plan." The conference room felt suffocating. Every breath tasted bitter. 3 months of 18-hour days, diving deep into our client's safety compliance nightmare, analyzing every document, every medical record, every possibility. And they chose the flashy PowerPoint presentation over my surgical precision. Celeste sat there with that perfect smile, already soaking up the praise for her innovative thinking. But what crushed me wasn't just being overlooked, it was knowing that her aggressive strategy will destroy everything I had worked so carefully to protect. Lives hung in the balance, and they had just chosen spectacle over substance. Before I tell you what happened next, could you please take a few seconds to tell me in the comments if you've ever had your expertise completely dismissive be someone who didn't understand the full scope of what you were trying to prevent? Because what I discovered about our client's situation and what I did about it, you need to hear this entire story. 6 months earlier, I had been assigned to what seemed like a straightforward case. Brickmont Manufacturing, a family-owned chemical processing plant, faced a lawsuit from an employee named Tobias, who suffered severe chemical burns during a routine maintenance procedure. The company contacted our crisis management firm because they needed someone to handle the media fallout and negotiate a reasonable settlement. On paper, it looked simple: one injured worker, clear liability, manageable damages. The family who owned Brookma had built their business over 3 generations. They weren't corporate villains trying to dodge responsibility. They genuinely wanted to do right by Tobias while protecting their employees and their legacy. But I have this habit that drives my colleagues crazy. I dig deeper than necessary. While everyone else was calculating settlement amounts and drafting press statements, I spent weeks at the Brookmont facility, walking every hallway, talking to every worker, reviewing every safety protocol. What I found made my heart race. The chemical that burned Tobias wasn't just a random accident. The same compound had been slowly poisoning workers for 5 years. Most didn't even realize they were sick yet. The exposure levels were just below the threshold that would trigger immediate symptoms, but long-term contact was causing organ damage that wouldn't show up for months or years. I discovered this by accident. While reviewing Tobias's medical records, I noticed something strange in his pre-injury health screenings: liver enzyme levels that had been gradually climbing for 2 years before the accident. When I cross-referenced this with other employees' medical data, a pattern emerged that terrified me. 43 workers showed early signs of chemical-related organ damage. Some would need lifelong treatment. Some had conditions that could become fatal without immediate intervention, and none of them knew. I spent weeks developing what I considered an elegant solution: settle quietly with Tobias for a fair amount, simultaneously launch a voluntary wellness program offering free health screenings to all employees through an independent medical group, identify the affected workers before their conditions worsened, provide treatment and compensation through a discretionary health fund, fix the underlying safety protocols. Total estimated cost, $2 million. Public exposure, 0. Lives saved, 40-3. I presented this plan to Spencer with meticulous documentation. Every cost projection, every legal consideration, every timeline detail. I thought I had crafted the perfect solution that would protect everyone involved. Then Celeste entered the picture. Celeste had joined our firm 6 months prior with impressive credentials and an even more impressive ability to make everything sound revolutionary. She had this way of taking complex problems and turning them into simple narratives that executives loved to hear. Her proposal was the complete opposite of mine. Fight the lawsuit. Aggressively deny all responsibility. Hire a team of expensive litigators. proved that Tobias's injury was entirely his own fault due to failure to follow safety protocols. Make an example of this Casado discourage future claims. Sometimes you have to show strength, she told Spencer during her presentation. If we settle quietly, it sends a message that Brookma is an easy target. Other employees will start filing claims for every minor incident. We need to demonstrate that this company won't be bullied. Her presentation was polished and confident. She'd created charts showing how aggressive litigation strategies she had worked for other manufacturing companies. She quoted statistics about deterrent effects and cost savings. She made it sound like taking a hard line was not just smart business, but morally justified. Spencer was completely convinced. I tried to explain this approach would backfire catastrophically. When you fight aggressively against a legitimately injured worker, their attorney gets suspicious. They start digging deeper. They start asking uncomfortable questions. And when they find evidence of broader safety problems, a simple personal injury case becomes a class action nightmare. But Spencer had already made his decision. Your approach is too cautious, Nadia. Sometimes you have to take calculated risks to protect your client's long-term interests. I left that meeting feeling physically sick, not because my plan was rejected, but because I knew exactly what was going to happen next. Celeste's strategy launched with great fanfare. Brookmont hired 3 different law firms to represent them. They filed counterclaims against Tobias, alleging that he had violated safety protocols and demanding that he pay for damages to their equipment. They held press conferences, stating that they would vigorously defend against frivolous claims. Tobias's attorney, Miguel Ortega, had initially planned to pursue a straightforward settlement negotiation, but the aggressive response puzzled him. Why would a family-owned company spend hundreds of thousands of dollars fighting a case they would obviously lose? So he started investigating. Within 2 weeks, Miguel had subpoenaed 5 years of safety records. Within a month, he had requested medical records for all current and former employees. Within 6 weeks, he had environmental testing data that showed exactly what I had already discovered. But Miguel found something else. Something that made my careful plan impossible to execute. While I had been developing my quiet solution, Celeste had been covering tracks. She'd advised Brookmont to destroy any internal communications about safety concerns. She had recommended that they stop conducting routine health screenings to avoid creating problematic documentation. She had essentially helped them obstruct any investigation. This meant that when Miguel's investigation on the broader chemical exposure problem, it looked like Brookmont had been deliberately hiding evidence. What could have been handled as a good faith mistake became potential criminal negligence. I watched this unfold with growing horror. Everything I had predicted was happening, but worse than I had imagined. The original lawsuit exploded into a class action case representing 67 current and former employees. Local news outlets picked up the story. Federal workplace safety investigators launched a full investigation. Environmental regulators started testing soil and groundwater around the facility. Brookmont's insurance company refused to cover the legal costs, claiming that the aggressive litigation strategy had voided their coverage. The family was facing personal bankruptcy. 3 generations of building a business were about to be destroyed. But I had been working on something else during those months. While Celeste was implementing her aggressive strategy, I had been quietly executing my own plan in parallel. Not through official channels. Obviously, that would have been insubordination, but through my own network of contacts and resources. I had approached the community health clinic * in Brookmont's neighborhood and arranged for them to offer free occupational health screenings. I explained that I was concerned about potential exposure risks in the industrial area and wanted to provide preventive care for local workers. Most of Brookmont's employees lived within a few miles of the plant. When the clinic announced free health screenings focused on occupational wellness, 41 of the 43 workers I had identified participated. They thought it was just routine community health care. The test results confirmed everything I had discovered: elevated liver enzymes, early-stage kidney damage, respiratory irritation consistent with chemical exposure. I documented proof of the scope of the problem months before Miguel's investigation began. But I had also done something else that nobody knew about. Role in creating it. It would have cost them money, but it would have saved their business and their reputation. Instead, I watched Miguel's investigation destroy any possibility of quiet resolution. The environmental testing revealed soil contamination that extended beyond Brookmont's property. The health screening that Miguel ordered through the courts found additional workers with exposure-related conditions. The media coverage attracted attention from advocacy groups and politicians. Brookmont was now facing lawsuits totaling over $50 million. The family's personal assets were frozen. Pending investigation of their role in the cover-up, the facility was shut down by regulators, putting all remaining employees out of work. And then Spencer burst into my office, panic written across his face. "The client is threatening to sue us for malpractice," he said, his voice tight with stress. "They're claiming our strategy made everything worse. They want to know why we didn't warn them about the scope of their liability." "What do you know about this?" My assistant, Rain, appeared in the doorway, holding a simple white envelope. "Is this why you called?" she asked, her voice perfectly innocent. Spencer and Celeste, who had followed him into my office, looked confused. I had asked Rain to prepare this envelope 3 months ago, when I first realized how badly Celeste's strategy would backfire. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a list of 43 names. Next to each name, a medical condition and treatment recommendation. At the bottom, a date stamp from 4 months ago, weeks before Celeste had even presented her aggressive litigation strategy. Spencer's face went pale as he read. Celeste stared at the paper with her mouth slightly open. "You knew," Celeste whispered. "You knew exactly how bad this really was." I looked at both of them calmly. "I knew exactly how to fix it. You chose not to listen." The beautiful irony was perfect. By fighting the lawsuits so aggressively, they had guaranteed that every affected worker would receive maximum compensation through the courts, instead of the modest settlements and treatment costs my solution would have involved. Brookmont would pay 10 times more in damages and legal fees than my approach would have cost. But there was more. Miguel had discovered Celeste's role in advising Brookmont to destroy evidence and obstruct the investigation. Professional misconduct. Charges were being filed against both our firm and Celeste personally. Our malpractice insurance was threatening to drop coverage. And the workers, the 43 people whose health had been damaged by chemical exposure, Miguel had used my community health screening data as the foundation for his class action case. Every person I had identified was now receiving comprehensive medical treatment funded by the court settlement, plus compensation that far exceeded what I had originally planned to arrange. They were getting better care and more financial support than my quiet solution could have provided. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out the resignation letter I had written 3 months ago. I had hoped I wouldn't need it. "Comprehensive approach," I said quietly, echoing Spencer's words from that day in the conference room. "You were right. It was definitely more comprehensive." Spencer stared at my resignation letter like it might burst into flames. "Nadia, you can't just leave. We need to figure out how to handle this situation." "No," I said, standing up from my chair. "You need to figure out how to handle this situation. I tried to give you the solution months ago." Celeste finally found her voice. "But you knew about the other workers. You knew there was a bigger problem and you didn't tell us." "I told you exactly what you needed to know," I replied. "I presented a comprehensive solution that would have protected everyone. You decided it wasn't exciting enough." What they didn't understand yet was that my preparation had gone far beyond just identifying the affected workers. I had spent those 3 months building a complete alternative timeline for how this crisis should have been handled. While Celeste was crafting her aggressive litigation strategy, I had been quietly documenting every conversation, every decision, every piece of advice that led to this disaster, not just for Brookmont, but for our own firm's potential liability. I have recorded Celeste telling Brookmont destroy safety communications. I had emails where she explicitly advised them to stop health screenings to avoid creating problematic documentation. I had meeting transcripts where Spencer praised her approach, as Bolden dismissed my concerns as overcautious. All of this was sitting in a secure folder that I had shared with exactly one person, Elena Vasquez, the managing partner of our firm's biggest competitor. Elena and I had worked together at a different consulting firm 5 years earlier. She had always respected my analytical approach and had tried to recruit me multiple times. 6 weeks ago, when I realized how catastrophically Celeste's strategy was going to fail, I had finally called her. "I have a situation you might find interesting," I had told her. "A case study in how not to handle a corporate crisis, complete with documentation of every mistake." Elena had been very interested. Indeed, what Spencer and Celeste didn't know was that Elena's firm had been quietly approached by 3 other Brookmont employees who were considering filing additional lawsuits, instead of encouraging them to pursue litigation. Elena had connected them with a treatment program I had arranged through the community health clinic. Those workers were now receiving care without having to go through the trauma of a court battle, and Elena's firm was being paid a consulting fee by the treatment center for referring clients who needed specialized industrial exposure therapy. Meanwhile, Brookmont's insurance company had discovered our firm's role line advising them to destroy evidence. They were now claiming that our advice had voided their coverage and were demanding that we reimburse them for the legal costs they'd already paid. Our firm was facing a professional malpractice lawsuit that could destroy the business. 3 other clients had already terminated their contracts after reading about the Brookmont situation in the industry press. 2 of our senior partners were considering leaving to start their own practice. But the most devastating consequence was still coming. Miguel Ortega was not just any personal injury attorney. He was also an adjunct professor at the local law school, where he taught a course on corporate crisis management ethics. The Brookmont case had become a perfect teaching example of how corporate consultants could make a bad situation infinitely worse through poor advice. Miguel had reached out to several industry publications to share his analysis of our firm's role in escalating the crisis. The first article was scheduled to publish in Crisis Management Quarterly next week. The headline was already circulating among industry insiders: "When Crisis Consultants Create the Crisis, a Case Study in Professional Negligence." Elena had shown me a preview copy. It was devastating. The article detailed every piece of bad advice Celeste had given. It showed how our firm had transformed a manageable safety incident into a multi-million-dollar catastrophe, aggressive tactics that violated basic crisis management principles. It included quotes from unnamed sources within our firm, describing the internal debate between different approaches. One quote in particular stood out. A senior consultant at the firm had reportedly developed a comprehensive solution that would have addressed the underlying health concerns while protecting both the workers and the company's reputation. However, management chose to implement a more aggressive strategy that ultimately backfired spectacularly. The unnamed senior consultant was obviously me, but Miguel had been careful not to identify me directly, which meant I couldn't be blamed for cooperating with his investigation. The article would destroy our firm's reputation, but it would also establish me as the consultant who had tried to prevent the disaster. Elena had already started reaching out to our biggest clients, offering to provide crisis management service tips focused on ethical solutions and long-term reputation protection. Asterisk 3 of them had already scheduled meetings, but the revenge I was most proud of wasn't about business. It was about justice. The community health screening program I had arranged wasn't just helping Brookmont workers. I had expanded it to include employees from 4 other industrial facilities in the area. We had identified 17 additional workers with early-stage exposure-related health problems from 3 different companies. Instead of waiting for these workers to get sick enough to file lawsuits, they were receiving treatment immediately. The program was being funded through a combination of grants I had helped secure and contributions from companies who wanted to demonstrate proactive safety commitment. Local news outlets had started covering the program. Asterisk. Celeste's aggressive strategy had made all of this possible. If we had implemented my original quiet solution, we would have helped 43 workers while keeping the broader issues hidden. The other companies with similar problems would have continued poisoning their employees. The systemic changes wouldn't have happened by fighting so hard against a legitimate claim. Celeste had drawn enough attention to expose the entire pattern of industrial negligence in our region. Her failure had become the foundation for protecting far more workers than my original plan could have reached. Spencer was still holding my resignation letter, looking completely lost. What are we supposed to tell the partners? How do we explain this to our other clients? You tell them the truth, I said. You tell them that you had access to critical information that could have prevented this disaster. and you chose to ignore it because you preferred a more dramatic approach. Celeste finally seemed to understand the scope of what was happening. The malpractice lawsuit. If they prove that we knew about the broader health problems and didn't disclose them, you'll probably lose your license. I finished, and the firm will likely face bankruptcy, but don't worry. I'm sure you can find another career where attention-seeking presentation skills are more important than actual expertise. I started packing my personal items from my desk. There wasn't much. I'd been preparing for this departure for months. What about the other clients? Spencer asked desperately. You're working on the Morrison Industries case and the Broadmoor chemical situation. I've already transitioned all of my active cases, I told him. Complete documentation, analysis, and recommended strategies. Everything is in the shared drive. What I didn't mention was that my case documentation included detailed notes about the potential long-term consequences of different approaches. Future consultants would be able to see exactly how I analyzed risks and developed solutions. They would also be able to see where Spencer and Celeste had overruled my recommendations. If any of those cases went badly, there would be a clear paper trail showing that I had warned about the problems in advance. Elena knocked on my office door at exactly 2:30, just as we had arranged. Nadia, are you ready for our meeting? Spencer and Celeste looked confused. They had no idea that Elena was here to finalize my employment agreement with her firm. Elena Vasquez, I said, making introductions. Managing partner at Strategic Solutions Group, Elena. This is my soon-to-be former supervisor, Spencer, and my colleague, Celeste. Elena smiled politely, but I could see the professional assessment in her eyes as she looked at them. She was probably calculating how many clients would be looking for new representation once word spread about the Brookmont disaster. I've heard interesting things about your recent work, Elena told them. The Brookmont case has become quite a topic of conversation in our industry. Spencer's face turned red. Celeste looked like she might be sick. Nadia, should we head to lunch? We have quite a bit to discuss about your transition, Elena said as we walked toward the elevator. I could hear Spencer and Celeste having a heated conversation in my former office, probably trying to figure out how much damage control they could do before the story became public. Elena waited until we were in her car before speaking. The contracts are ready. Starting salary is 40% higher than what you were making, signing bonus to cover any legal costs. If your former firm tries to claim you breached confidentiality, and you'll be leading our new industrial crisis prevention division. What about the Brookmont documentation? I asked. Miguel has everything he needs for his article. The state attorneys general in 3 states are opening investigations into industrial health screening practices. The treatment program you developed is being studied as a potential model for federal policy, and our former clients. Elena grinned. 6 of them have already contacted us. Apparently, they're looking for consultants who focus on preventing problems instead of creating them. Over the following weeks, I watched the consequences of my carefully planned revenge unfold exactly as I had predicted. The Crisis Management Quarterly article was republished in 4 other industry journals. It became required reading in business ethics courses at 17 universities. Spencer and Celeste were interviewed by investigators from the State Bar Association. Our former firm lost 11 clients in the first month after the article was published. 3 partners left to join competing firms. Spencer was forced to step down. As department head, Celeste was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the professional misconduct investigation. Meanwhile, the community health screening program had expanded to cover 12 industrial facilities across 3 counties. We had identified 62 workers with early-stage health problems and connected all of them with appropriate treatment. The program was being funded by a combination of state grants and voluntary contributions from companies who wanted to demonstrate their commitment to worker safety. I was invited to testify before a state legislative committee about industrial health screening requirements. The testimony led to a bill that would require all facilities using hazardous chemicals to provide annual health screenings for employees. The bill passed unanimously. Miguel Ortega asked me to be a guest lecturer in his crisis management ethics course. My presentation on preventing crisis through proactive analysis became the highest rated lecture of the semester, but the most satisfying moment came 6 months later. Elena and I were having lunch at a restaurant downtown when Celeste approached our table. She looked exhausted and older than her 32 years. "Nadia," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to apologize. I know what I did was wrong. I know I should have listened to you." I looked at her calmly. "The people you should apologize to are the workers who got sick because you advised their employer to hide evidence instead of fix the problem. I've been trying to find a new job," she continued. "But everyone in the industry knows about BROOKMONT. No one will hire me." "That's probably for the best," I told her. "Crisis management requires putting people's safety ahead of dramatic presentations. It doesn't seem like that's your strength." She walked away without another word. Elena watched her go, then turned back to me. "Do you ever feel bad about how completely you destroyed her career?" I thought about it for a moment. I think about the 43 workers who would have gotten sick without proper treatment if I hadn't intervened. I think about the 17 additional workers we identified at other facilities. Think about the 62 people who are receiving treatment now, instead of waiting until their conditions became life-threatening. And Celeste, she made a choice to prioritize her own success over other people's lives. The consequences of that choice were always going to catch up with her eventually. I just made sure it happened before she could hurt anyone else. Elena nodded. "The new federal guidelines are coming out next month. The Department of Labor is requiring health screening programs for all facilities with potential chemical exposure. They're using your community program as the model." "How many workers will that protect?" "Estimated 200,000 annually." I smiled. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just getting back at the people who wronged you. Sometimes it's making sure their mistakes become the foundation for something better. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew the right solution but were overruled by someone who cared more about looking impressive than doing the right thing? Have you ever had to watch a preventable disaster unfold because someone chose flashy over effective? Drop a comment below and tell me your story, because I have a feeling I'm not the only one who's experienced this kind of professional frustration. And if this story showed you why careful analysis matters more than dramatic presentations, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about justice served through patience and preparation. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being right and having the documentation to prove it.